Hey everyone! Welcome to Live and Unscripted. I'm Susan Smith and you're in my studio Stitched by Susan, where today I'm going to be free motion quilting a Christmas table runner that features a little overcooked, well done gingerbread men. Tune in to see the details on that, and with that, let's give an intro to the show and we'll get at it.
Welcome to Live and Unscripted with Susan Smith, quilting's first reality show.
Hey there, back again. Okay, many thanks to Will, our son, who does those voices for the various introductions. I love that. And a huge thanks to Mr. Producer, who is always behind the scenes, running the camera, fixing the sound. We had sound issues this morning, and the camera's going to wobble while... What's wrong with the camera? I think it looks fine, but he thinks it's not quite right, so he's fixing it for us. So thanks, Mr. Producer. And also thanks are due to our good friend Dan Unger, whose guitar music you will hear featured throughout these shows. Okay, today is Live and Unscripted, which means I am in real time quilting a project for you from start to finish. If you're new to the show, this is, to the best of my knowledge, quilting's first and only reality show, in that I show right from the start of a project in real time without any edits through the quilting process. So there are days when I can't get a whole project done because it's too long. Today, hopefully we can fit an entire one in, but we don't edit out anything. So if there are decisions to be made on the fly or thread breaks that happen or various things, all that is left in the show, and I just talk as I'm working in my studio and welcome you to sort of look over my shoulder. This is the sort of thing that I desperately wished I had had when I first began quilting, because I had so many questions about, is it okay to load this way or to use that color thread or whatever? So I'm a talker, so I just talk through the various things that I'm doing and why I do them. And it's not a right or wrong or a lesson, it's just how I work. So welcome to my studio. Let's get started on today's project, and I'll keep talking as we go. I'm going to grab the backing first, which is kind of off camera here, and we'll get it loaded up. I am working at a Bernina Q24. You can see her on the side here. This is Stella, my good buddy. Stella and I are pretty good pals. So here is the backing. Now, because I'm working on a table runner, it is, as you might imagine, much longer in one direction. So I've chosen, for the sake of efficiency, to load that runner lengthwise then on my rails so that I have the fewest passes, right, as I'm working my way down the quilt. And it happens to work well for the backing. This is my selvage, my long edge. So it is literally a width of fabric long enough for my runner. So I load my quilts with red snappers, which two are snapped together here. Let's get that apart. Let's just double check our spacing for the quilt here, because Mr. Producer is motioning me to load further down, and I got to see how much room I have. Well, is that going to be okay? Well, either that or I can move Stella to the other end. And probably my piece won't go all the way to the end either. Okay, so red snappers means there's a little red core inside my leader right here, and my snapper bit is just going to snap the edge of my fabric on. This is the most quick and efficient loading method I have ever found. It does require that you have a straight edge for this first loading edge, which, because I have a selvage today, I know is perfectly straight. And then the time saving comes in. I don't have to square up the entire backing. I only need one straight edge to begin. And I line it up with whatever seam lines or zippers or what have you my leader has. Yours might have different things than mine. I do have a hemline and a zipper, and so I can line up that straight edge quite nicely with that and snap it in place. Need another piece. There's our front edge. I do hope everyone had a lovely Thanksgiving yesterday. We had such a great day doing practically nothing, a little bit of cooking. Our son was here and one of his buddies, so it was a small crowd. And this, by the way, is how I treat my farthest leader. I've got a dead bar or a leveler bar, and with my method of loading, I kind of reverse engineered it to find that I need to flip my leader over, and then I attach the far end of my backing, and then you'll see this flop back into place after I get it attached. So from there, I take my backing and toss it over the far rail. We've got a lot of cables going on this morning, it feels like. Okay, and here's a critical part. I'm going to walk around the end of the long arm. Critical part is that this backing is straight over the rail. In other words, I don't want to pull it to one side or the other, or I start getting those crosswise pull lines. So that's the important thing. If your front edge is straight, you should be able to roll this on and allow that rolling action to keep it straight. I roll until my far edge is just past the leader, and then I come to the other side and clip it in place. I keep a spare magnet sitting on my machine just for that purpose. It acts kind of like a pin to hold that in place. Mr. Producer is saying that they're on sale at Harbor Freight right now for $1.76, the magnets. So if you've ever wanted some, these magnetic bars, run and grab them. They come in different lengths. You're seeing a 12-inch one right here on the rail, but most of mine are 18 inches long. And I have enough of them to just about reach from end to end of my frame. Maybe I should run and get one or two more. Anyway, I keep one on this side just for holding my quilt in place till I get the snappers on. And there you saw that leader flop back down. And now when I roll this up, you'll be able to see, yep, in this camera. Let me just let it loose a little bit so you can see a bit more. There we go. This is my canvas leader up here, the snappers, and then onto my backing. So now that's rolling right underneath my leveler bar, my dead bar, over my belly bar, and attached at the lower rail in front of me. And now for the batting. Today I've chosen to use a bamboo batting, chiefly because this was the end of my roll. So it's the perfect size for a runner. You can see the depth of it, not very deep, and you can see the rough edge. That was the cut edge of my roll. So I'm actually going to flip it the other way. Put my straight edge to the top. And I purchased my batting in rolls, and they're 120 inches wide. So as you can see, this is really, really long. Now I'm going to trim some of that length off. I do not like to have extra batting extending at all beyond my backing. It gets caught in my long arm and the wheels and just really gets in the way. And I see that I have tiny little fabric trimmings on here. It's funny, no matter how often you vacuum and sweep, there's always the bits, right? So we're going to trim off this end. It would be easier if Stella was not here, so let's move her a little bit. Like that. And I do this even when I've got a full batting. If I need to trim off the edge, I just fold it up so that I can see my backing and know where to trim it. And sometimes I make several folds to get it up to where it's visible. And then I just trim off that excess. Fling it off camera. Good. So this bamboo batting is 100% bamboo. It is by Winline, and it is their 6-ounce weight. If you go shopping for it, they have a 4-ounce and a 6-ounce. I love the 6. It's very thick and soft and luxurious. Okay, now for the gingerbread men. You guys are going to laugh when you see the little burnt gingerbread men. Aren't they hysterical? There's one just done one and two black ones on each plate, on each end. I just think that was so clever. And I don't know if the pattern was designed this way or if Erin, the maker, just chose to do it that way, but either way, good bit of humor there. Okay, there's my runner. So you can see clearly now why it makes sense to load it this way on my long arm, because I'm only going to have two passes. Here's the end of it. Where if I loaded the other way, that just doesn't make sense, right? Efficiency-wise. I've got, let me just look at my thread color. It is 0761 for anyone who's wanting to know. I'm using 100%, I'll pull out the spool, 100% polyester isocord thread, and it's a 40 weight. It's my personal favorite brand of thread. There are lots of polyesters that are great. This is just one I started using. My machine handles it well. I like the look of it, so I've stuck with it. And isocord has tons and tons of pretty colors, so I like that. All right, so first off, we're going to baste the edges of the runner. There are several ways to do this, but my preferred way is to go up the left side, across the top, and down the right. And I've got a 1/4 inch basting stitch on. Doesn't really matter what size your stitching is. I'm stitching well within 1/4 inch of the edge of the quilt so that that will all get hidden inside the binding. Doesn't ever have to be undone. Now I do see that there is a little bit of fullness in these gifty things along the edge. There's a lot of seams there, right? And it's a little bit fuller than this center. So I'm going to make sure I've got the center well smoothed out. And then I'm going to make sure I've got this evenly distributed because I don't want to push it all to one side, right? It's not a lot, it's just a very little. I just want to be conscious of it and ease it in. And I'm also going to put my channel lock on since I'm lucky enough to have them. Not channel lock, but engage my belt so that I get a nice perfectly straight line along the top. So now my machine is, it's going to run perfectly straight horizontally and not move back and forth. And I'll adjust my quilt top as I need to fall under the straight line that the needle is stitching. So if you have a channel lock or a belt you can engage, it can be really helpful when you want to make a long straight runner. Failing that, you could line it up with the snappers. You could pin it in place and stand back and look at it to make sure it's nice and straight before you start stitching. But since I have those belts I can engage, I will do it. So all I'm doing is putting either some pressure or some pull on the area that's already been stitched so that what I'm coming up on gets pulled under the needle a little faster. Otherwise, it would tend to push out in front of me. Can you see that happening already? So I just need to pull that under the needle a little more quickly. And that's what's going to ease in that little tiny bit of excess. No one will ever know at the end, like it's such a little bit, but it so commonly happens when you have a ton of seams along an edge of a quilt like this. It's all too easy for it to stretch out into a bit of fullness. Tug this down just a little bit more. That's the beauty of having that straight line marked on there for me. Not marked, but straight line because of my engaged belt. Basting to me, by the way, is an absolute non-negotiable in quilting. I've done it for so long, and so it's become such a part of my routine. It always surprises me when I go, for example, into quilt shops that have machines for rental, and I see people stitching without having basted the perimeter of their quilt, and they're just quilting away. It still startles me to this day, as to me it feels like an absolute essential foundational point to achieve a square result. If you don't, then as you quilt across it, it will pull in and it will pull your quilt out of square. There's just no getting around it. So first and most important step, in my opinion. Okay, we're all basted. Now I will grab my additional magnets and Put them along the front. This secures my fourth side so that now my quilt cannot shift or move while I'm quilting. Perfect. We're ready to quilt, folks. Do we have any questions or things we want to talk about before we get going? Okay, I do need to put side clamps on, but let's take a couple questions. Let me move Stella because she's right smack in the way. Oh, the camera's changing. There we go. Okay, Nancy, think we need a meet and greet in BC, don't you think? But are we going to do it on the north end, which is my part, or the south end, which is yours? Okay, Robin, is your table 12 foot or 14 foot? It's a 12, Robin. Debbie, I recently quilted all over feathers on a quilt with wool batting. The top measured 98 by 114 before and 96 by 110 after. Is this amount of shrinkage normal? That is quite a bit. 2 inches one way and 4 the other. 2 inches does not surprise me. 4 seems like a lot. But that is a really concrete example of how quilting, especially when you release it off the long arm rails, really pulls it together. It just does. So another good reason for basting is to keep it square and flat, at least while you're doing the stitching. Noreen, does that batting have scrim? It does not have scrim, Noreen, no. It is needle punched, but it doesn't have scrim.
Yeah, there's a pair with the same thing.
Okay, Judy, is there a pattern name? If there is, I don't actually know it, you guys. And I should have asked Erin whose quilt it is before I loaded it up today, but I did not. I'll try and remember to ask her afterwards and put it in the description. It's not our Erin, no, Dave. I have an Erin that works with me too. That's our Erin. So this is another Erin. Okay, is that it for questions? Nope, there's more. I see them. Victoria, have you ever thought of coming to the Festival of Quilts in Birmingham, UK? Yes, I have. I'm seriously thinking about coming in 2025, actually. More on that as I make a decision on that one. And yes, I have thought of that. And by the way, to those of you who were saying, one or two of you said, time for a meetup in BC, here's a place where we could meet up. I'm going on a cruise in January, and there are still, we're not sure if there's 2 or 3 rooms left. Anyway, there's a couple of double rooms left, and we are hoping really to get them occupied by about the 12th of December. That's our deadline for getting names registered and getting rooms assigned. So there's a few more spots available for that. And if you haven't heard me talk about it before, Beth Ann Nemish and Sam Alberts are joining me in teaching. So the 3 of us will be teaching. There will be a ton of machine quilting content, of business building content, which is, kind of ad hoc, and you can take or leave as much of that as you wish. But the quilting lessons will all be kind of interwoven in the sense that we're trying to complement each other's style. So you really want to take all the classes. There will be a ton on the At Sea days. We're each having trunk shows. I mean, there's going to be a lot of great content. So Dave's put the website up there for you if you want to get more information about that. And we're going to try to, side note, I know he's got another question up there, but we're going to try to do a Q&A session, and it'll probably just be Dave and I for cruisers as well. So if you have any questions remaining about, things like your accommodations or motel the night before or after, or taxis to the port or whatever, or the content or what's going to be available on the ship, we're going to try and answer all those questions. Within the next week or two, we'll be trying to do that live Q&A. So I'll keep you posted in my newsletter, okay? So the question was, do you like needle punched batting more than scrim? It just so happens, Doreen, that the brand I use right now, which is Winline, I love their Hobbs, not their Hobbs, their 80/20 cotton poly, and I love their bamboo. So those are my 2 favorite battings, and they happen to be needle punched and not scrim. I don't know that I've ever used battings with scrim very often at all, because the 80/20 has always been my go-to, whatever brand I'm currently fond of. And it doesn't generally have scrim. So I don't have strong opinions either way. It just happens to be that the brand I'm using and the style I'm using does not have scrim. It's just needle punched. More questions? That's it. Okay, let's get our side clamps on and start quilting. Victoria is saying she'd love to meet me in Birmingham. And gosh, I'd love to come, believe me. As you might imagine, that's a bit of a production to go overseas to a quilting show, but I am going to try. Got some irons in the fire, and I'll keep you guys posted as plans get firmed up. Okay. So the design that I'm quilting today is an original one. I call it filaments. I should have had a picture ready. This came straight off a paper napkin that we had at our tables, but there is also a published digital design called Knit 1 Purl 2 that is really, really similar. So if those of you who are watching like to use digitized designs, know that you can find that one. I hate to think that mine looks like a knockoff of hers, because I want to respect, original designs very much. But mine definitely came right off a paper napkin. And this is what it looks like. I call it filaments, because I think it kind of looks like the filaments in a light bulb. This particular design I teach in my monthly subscription membership, which I call Advance. It's kind of a play on words for, advancing a quilt, advancing your skills, not because it's particularly advanced quilting. But anyway, this is one of the lessons in that membership, is step by step by step quilting this design, how I work my way around a quilt. All of that. Dave's going to put up a link, I think. I sent him one. Hope he's got it. For some information on that membership, if you're interested in it. I've tried to make it as absolutely reasonable for as many quilters as possible as I can. I really, really love free motion quilting and want to help other quilters feel the same. So when I first issued that membership, it was $20 a month. And just a couple of months ago, I lowered that price to $12.97 for everybody. So $12.97 a month gets you 2 lessons every month. They vary. Sometimes they are edge-to-edge designs like this one. Sometimes they are guest artists. I know this coming month, December, we've got a guest artist in, and she's working at a sit-down domestic machine. And she has a quite different style from mine. So it's fun to see what other quilters are doing and bring other guests in. Sometimes it's case studies. It's a deeper look at some of my custom projects, kind of step by step as I'm working through them. I was just filming one of those this week. Oh, and I feel the bottom thread caught on something. I don't know what, but let's have a look. No point in keeping on going, because I guarantee you it pulled the tension funny on the back. Yeah, I can feel the stitches on the back. So we're so close to the edge of the quilt. I'm just going to undo back to that basting edge. Let me move the camera so you can see what I'm doing. I know it's a shiny fabric. I don't know how well this is translating on camera. This is something that I have learned over time, is when something sounds wrong, when something feels wrong, I just, as a matter of course, stop. It's not going to get better by just going on. And the fact is, if I, caught a belt or something like that, it might be just a momentary lapse and I may be able to just go on stitching, but something will have gone wrong. That momentary jerk did something. So I've learned over time not to just press through it, but to go ahead, back up, and fix the problem. So let's have a look at the bobbin and make sure that it is going smoothly. It is. Do a quick test in my hand. It's good. And I did, just before we came on air, by the way, I did my morning, clean with a paintbrush, a fluffy paintbrush, and drop of oil in there. That's kind of a morning technique. First thing when I start quilting in the day. Thread tail here. At various different points when I do a thread check like that, you saw me dangle the bobbin in my hand. Also, when I pulled my bobbin thread up, I pulled on it a few inches. All of those points are like checkpoints for me to feel, does the bobbin feel like it's releasing thread correctly? I want to know that it is before I start stitching again, or I'm just going to have the same problem again, right? So that's how I check it out. And some of those I don't talk about as I do them. They're just so automatic. Just as I'm threading my bobbin, I'm pulling 6 inches. As I pull my bottom thread up to the top, I pull another 6 inches. But that's why I'm doing it. There is reason behind that. It's not just thread wastage. I'm currently stitching in stitch regulated mode, so I have my machine set for 10 stitches per inch. Sometimes I stitch in manual mode, which is a smoother, evener kind of way to stitch sometimes without having that regulator on. However, I'm working particularly where these gingerbread men are with some thicknesses of like a stabilizer, right? So there's one layer here under the tan, there's 2 layers under the little gingerbread boys. And so I feel like I have to slow down for those things, and there's quite a few seams in this quilt too. So whenever I think that I need a kind of variable speed like that, that's when I leave the stitch regulator on so that I can speed up and slow down as needed. I feel like these little filaments are kind of reminiscent of Christmas lights too. More of the tangled wires perhaps than the lights, am I right? Sometimes those little pauses are just me taking stock of where I am in my quilt, where I know I need to fill in areas, and in the case of this design, it's often deciding which direction I want to go in next. So I will often pause, and I've quilted this design quite a lot of times, so if you need to pause longer, absolutely. That's something I do quite a bit with free motion quilting, especially when it's a design I haven't quilted often before, is just stop when I come to the end of a repeat and like, do I want to go up? Do I want to go down? Left, right? Do I want to echo like this to where I want to travel next? All those things. What you, of course, can't see on camera is that I'm often glancing off to the side to see where am I? Have I got a corner I need to fill, etc. You can't see my eyes flicking to the right and to the left deciding those things, but it does happen. That's how I keep myself from getting quilted into a corner that I can't then get out of. Although, to be honest, this design is fairly easy because it does have this built-in echo, and if needed I can just do a whole nother echo in order to travel somewhere that I need to. An echo is a quilter's best friend. Like this. Mr. Producer, I feel like a poll might be in order. What's your favorite Thanksgiving pie? My mom was a fantastic pie maker, and I never quite got the knack of yummy pie crusts like she used to make. So I cheat and do mine in a food processor, but hey, it works. But I do absolutely love me a good pie. next weekend I'm going to be traveling into Montana. Maybe Dave, you can look up the name of that shop, because it has slipped my mind. It's a terrible time for that to happen. But anyway, I'm going to be teaching at a shop, a couple of different classes, but one of them is for beginner machine quilters, and it's like a certification class to be able to come in and rent the Bernina machines at that shop. I'm sorry? Missoula. So yeah, if any of you happen to be local and want to come in, we will provide the shop name for you here in half a second. It's kind of embarrassing, actually, that I don't know the name of the town. I know the name of the lady I was speaking to, but they do all kind of run together after a little bit. Anyway, it's going to be fun to teach there. I have not taught there before, so you're meeting some new quilters. And yeah, clearly some ladies who are getting into long arming, and that's always really fun. Get to chat with them. So if you're in that neck of the woods, look up the shop, see if there are any openings. I'd love to see you there. I'm not sure if you guys can hear it, but when I stitch over these fused areas, this is where I'm slowing down and stitching with care, because there is a certain amount of resistance. My machine is handling it well, but it is thicker. It just is, and that's where you have an opportunity for a broken needle if you keep zooming at a great rate. And also probably when I'm done this runner, I've already done 1 or 2 small quilts, so it's probably time for a fresh needle too, after having stitched through these thick areas. So before I start my next quilt, I'll take a moment and pop a fresh needle in. I just use a very run-of-the-mill size, a 90-14, but I'm very fond of top stitch needles right now. They have a longer scarf or eye, and it seems to handle long arm quilting super well. And by the way, my Bernina uses regular sewing machine needles. So they're not fancy or special needles in any way. They're just a 90-14 top stitch is what I have loaded right now. If you have not changed long arm needles before and don't know the marvel that is, let me tell you. Most long arms, in fact all long arms that I know of, require a specialty needle, which is a more, I guess, a heavy duty needle. But what's different about them is that the shank is round, and so in order to put them in to your machine, you've got to have some way of putting them in straight, because you can't tell by looking. They can fit any number of ways because that shank is round, and so people do different things. They tuck a pin into the eye of the needle and make sure that it's sticking straight out due north, so to speak, or they actually use a magnet to get that eye to be straight toward the front. It's a little bit fussy though. It's a little bit fussy, so I do quite love the fact that I now have a flat back sewing machine needle, and I can just mix and match needles from my sewing machine and my long arm. They work in both places, the same needles, and they go in just one way only. No fuss, no bother. It gives me a wide variety of needles that I can use if I choose to as well. Can use top stitch needles, can use jeans needles. I've done a little bit of quilting actually with a twin needle and 2 different threads on this machine, and that's kind of fun. One small thing that I'm trying to do as I work through these filaments is to keep them pointing in different directions so that I don't get a whole bunch of them side by side all going the same way, just to keep interest in the movement of it. So sometimes I travel just to make that happen. I travel to a new starting position just so that I can randomize the directions that they're pointing toward. As I come to the end of this pass and get ready to advance, we'll take some time for questions or comments again. So now's the moment to be typing those in. Just going to stop with our needle down in the basting stitch. Take all of our holding apparatuses off. Promised you a quickie, and that's indeed what this is. Here's the end of it already. I like to give a gentle tug to my batting and of course to my quilt top whenever I advance. Very gentle. I don't want to stretch it by any means, but I don't want there to be any rumples under there either. So that looks nice and straight. Again, I've got just this little bit of fullness here where all these multiple seams are. So I'm just making sure that the seam lines are straight, it's kind of evenly dispersed, and then I'll work my way along basting that in place, and then we'll pause for some questions and comments and to hear what your favorite kind of Thanksgiving pie is, or pie in general, even. And here again, I'm going to grab what has already been stitched and tug on it a bit. That's what pulls that little bit of fullness under the needle, easing it in just a touch. I want to put my channel lock on again so I get a lovely straight line. I always say channel lock, so funny. That is a throwback to an earlier machine. On this machine, I'm engaging belts is what I'm doing. Exactly the same purpose. It keeps me in a lovely straight horizontal line. Again, multiple ways I can do it. Picking up that seam allowance with my fingertips and pulling on it, putting some pressure on here. Another way is to literally pull it with your thumbnail. That will pull it under a little faster too. Lots of ways you can do it. Just get that fullness eased under the needle. Don't let it get away from you. That's the key. The more fullness there is, the harder my pull is. And like I said, this is very common on a piece where there are lots of seams meeting at the edge. Those seam endings tend to stretch out just a little bit. So all it takes is this little bit of easing and it will lay beautifully square and flat when all is said and done. This corner, however, is stretched out just a little bit long, so I'm actually going to just push the fabric in a bit. That will get taken up really nicely inside the filament design. Curvy designs are really good for that. So I've just kind of distributed that fullness, and I'll do that again as I'm quilting. Just trotting around, taking my channel lock off. There I went again, channel lock. Disengaging my belt. And here again, I'm not sure if you can probably see it on the big camera. There's a bit of fullness in here. Exactly the same process applies. I'll either put tension on it or pull the seam allowance or pull it with my fingernail, just causing it to ease a little bit with each stitch under the needle. And now as I come to my join, it's perfectly flat without a pleat. Beautiful. That's exactly what I want. Okay, I'm going to put those side clamps on before I forget, because I so often do when I'm on air and talking. Let's get those on, and then we'll take a couple questions, and I'll get a little sip of my coffee. My side clamps, by the way, are by the same people as make the red snappers. They're called E-edge clamps. There is a link to both the snappers and the clamps in the description below this video. I think sometimes I have to add that description on after the fact, in which case it'll get done this afternoon. Anyway, I do love these clamps. And then my Bernina elasticized clamps, the little black one that you're seeing right here, that just hangs onto it and gives that little gentle tension toward each side. Perfect. Okay, Mr. Producer, have we got thoughts? Thoughts on pies?
We're going to do the pies later.
Oh, pies are coming later. All right, we're saving that for dessert. Nancy, the quilt behind you, what's the pattern? I can't tell you the name, Nancy, but I do know it is by Missouri Star Quilt Company, and it's Tulip, something Tulip. This is from probably 10 years ago, so it's not a recent one, and so I can't tell you the name off the top of my head, sorry. Donna, can you explain scrim? Sure. Scrim is a super thin netting, almost film, that some battings have, and it'll be on one side or the other, and it's their method of holding everything in place, and it's fused right on. So you don't feel it in the hand of the batting, but you can usually tell by feel which side of the batting it's on, and you usually want that scrim to be down. Another way to keep all the layers together is needle punching, which is thousands of needles punching through it. So there's different ways that batting manufacturers sort of stabilize all those batting fibers. Mr. Producer says he posted some links about that, so hopefully you can find those. Okay, Janice. There's a photo you sometimes post of a blue star quilt with wavy lines and fills. Will you ever do an advanced class on that technique? Hope you know which one I'm talking about. I do, Janice, because you're not the only person asking. So the answer is yes, I absolutely will do one. It's not recorded yet, so it's going to be a little bit in the future till it gets recorded, edited, etc. But fairly soon in the new year, you will see a lesson on that one, yes. I would take suggestions for a name for it because I don't have one so far. Judy, how long are the filaments on this pattern? They really vary, Judy. I would say my longest ones are about 1.5 inches to 1 3/4 inches, but I tuck short ones like 1/2 and 3/4 inch ones in when I have little corners. But that gives you an idea. Suzanne, what is the difference between quilting needle and top stitch needle? The top stitch needle is also a sharp, but it has a longer scarf is the technical term, but it's the area where the eye of the needle is, and the actual eye is longer too, which to me allows the thread to flow more freely when I'm doing high stitch quilting. And I had a friend, Anna, who's in her 80s and has been sewing for forever, recommended them to me when I was having trouble with skipped stitches and thread breakage issues. And I went to Anna and said, like, what else can I change? I feel like I've tried everything. And she said, try a top stitch needle instead of just a universal eye. And I did that, and that seemed to help. And so I thought, if it'll still work for everything, I'll just use this needle. And that's what I've been doing for probably 6 months, and I've been really happy with them so far. Robin, can you share the setting you use at the sew head? I am currently using BSR1, Robin. So on the Bernina, BSR just means Bernina Stitch Regulator. And our regulators, for those who don't know, it's not an encoder in the wheel of the machine, which it is on many long arms. We have 2 tiny cameras. In some camera shots, you can see it. There's 2 little red lights under where I'm stitching. That's 2 cameras that are right underneath the fabric. And as I move my fabric, that's what they're reading. And that's what's regulating my stitch length. So the faster I move, the faster the needle goes. And the slower I move, the slower the needle goes to achieve 10 stitches per inch. So BSR1 is the stitch regulator is on, and also when I stop moving, but I still have it turned on, my needle coasts. I'll give you an example of that in a moment. There's also a setting where it absolutely stops stitching when you stop moving. Lauren, I noticed you treat the edge of the top quilt as a true edge rather than continuing your quilting into the backing a bit to keep the shape continuous. Is this personal preference or best practice? It is my personal preference. I think it's a best practice because I don't love to continue my quilting off past the edge of the quilt because then it's going to get cut when I trim up the quilt. And so you have multiple cut stitching lines then, which are not really secured other than the 2 or 3 stitches in the basting. So my preference, because I think it's better, is to stop my stitching within that basting line and act like my design was trimmed off. And I do that when I quilt digitally as well. I try and end my stitching within that basted edge so that my stitching lines don't get cut repeatedly. It is personal preference. I do think it is better. Noella, if you mentioned the name of this pattern, I'm sorry I missed it. I was late coming on. The name of the quilting design is Filaments. The name of the runner pattern, I don't actually have. I'm sorry for that. I'm going to try and get with the maker of it and publish that in the notes for this episode with luck later on today, or within a day or two anyways.
We're going to go through these really fast because I got a bunch of answers.
Okay, here's a bunch. This is the pie question. This is the big question of the day, am I right? Cherry cream. Oh my goodness, that sounds delicious. Pumpkin or elderberry? I make a killer apple pie. Me too. That's my favorite. Janice, definitely pumpkin. Pecan. I love my mom's homemade squash pies, which would be similar to a pumpkin. Yes, do you spice it the same way? I'm curious. Savannah, I made pumpkin pie this year but used sugar substitute. Couldn't tell the difference. Awesome. Good. I'm curious which one you used, which type you used. Suzanne, I do my crust in the food processor as well. It's not cheating, it's smart. Thank you for that pat on the back. I appreciate that. Nancy, pumpkin no crust. No one makes a crust like my mom. I couldn't quite learn her technique. I've done cheesecake lots of times, crust-free, and I love that. Debbie, I love to make apple pie, but my family prefers apple crisp. Both are good, just a little different. Wilma, coconut cream. Look at you guys. Savannah, pie in general would definitely be blueberry pie, and bonus that blueberries are also good for us. Yes, indeed. Ina Garten has a fabulous blueberry pie recipe. I'll have to look that up. I love Ina Garten. Pecan pie made by my son. Ooh, any pie made by someone else I feel like would be good. Donna loves cherry pie. Judy, pumpkin or lemon? You guys are making me hungry. Can anyone be hungry after yesterday? Really? I went to bed so full. Oh my gosh. That's it. Okay. I am curious about the sugar-free, the sugar substitute that you used. I've been using a monk fruit and erythritol blend lately, and I like it. It does not have the aftertaste that some of the substitutes seem to have. Okay, back to quilting. One more thing I want to say. I'll get in the middle. There we are. When I'm doing a free motion design edge to edge, I like to alternate where I start. So in my first pass, I started in the upper right hand corner. This time I'm going to start in the left hand side. This also aids in mixing up the directions that the design goes in, no matter whether it's flowers or in this case filaments. It keeps things looking more random. So that's why it doesn't matter which corner I start in, because I'm just going to alternate it for the next one anyways. Okay, funny story. My backing thread did not actually get cut. So there's a long tail under here. I pulled up the loop and I kind of fumbled it. And in fact, I did not cut the backing thread. Come on now. There we go. Mr. Producer wants me to mention, and I really should, Bernina has made some incredible specials for Black Friday. For long arms particularly. I know much more about their long arms than about their sewing machines in general. But on the long arms, I've not seen in my years with Bernina the prices that they're offering this year in Black Friday. So some really, really, really good sales. So if you've been thinking about one, this might be the moment to check with your local dealer. Okay, back to our filaments. Chances are we're going to run out of bobbin thread during this pass, but we're just going to stitch until it runs out. Okay, I was going to demonstrate for you the stitch regulator number 1. So what BSR number 1 does is when I hold my machine still, it keeps coasting. Watch this. See how my needle keeps going ever so gently? So there are places where you don't want that on. For example, if you're doing some ruler quilting. So that's something you can change. It's just using BSR number 2 is all you have to change to do that. So we have lots of options. But what's nice about that little coasting feature is you get nice sharp points. So for example, when I'm in the points of these little filaments right there, it takes just that one extra stitch and gives me a nice sharp point. So BSR 1 is what I typically use when I'm doing free motion quilting like this. It does mean, however, if you're going to stop and think a while about where to go next, you do want to stop your machine, because it will keep coasting until you move again. And will eventually form a knot with a lot of stitches if you stay still long enough. For those of you who have perhaps just tuned in, I am working today on a Christmas table runner, and I am free motion quilting a design that I call filaments, because I think it looks like the filaments in a light bulb. Originally inspired by some paper napkins we had on our table. I'm using Isocord 100% polyester 40 weight thread. I'm stitching on my Bernina Q24 quilting machine. And I am using a stitch regulator right now. I've got it set for 10 stitches per inch. And we've been talking about our favorite pies from Thanksgiving. And someone has assured me that I am not cheating when I make my pie crust in my food processor. It is really so very easy. I do love it. And we were talking briefly about our upcoming cruise in January, which, gosh, is coming up in a hurry, isn't it? January 18 to 25 of 2025, we'll be cruising the Caribbean. Mr. Producer and I, also fellow teachers Beth Ann Nemesh and Sam Alberts. Beth Ann is a very intricate, artistic quilter. She does absolutely stunning feathers, many stunning things, but she's known for her feathers. While Sam Alberts is a little more contemporary in style, but she quilts a lot of interesting things that I don't see elsewhere. I just love seeing what she's going to come up with next. So we three are going to be teaching on the At Sea days. We're also offering to anyone who's interested some very casual, we're calling them business breakouts. All three of us are entrepreneurs. We do a lot of our own filming. In Beth Ann's case, she has rulers and products. Sam and I have online courses. So we're going to be chatting about some things like one of my sessions is on photographing your quilts. Some simple settings, very simple edits that you can do on your iPhone that make your quilt photography just really level up. Beth Ann's going to be talking about client communication. Sam is going to be talking about quilter's block, which, you know, similar to writer's block. Actually, I think that's one of her main classes. So she thinks of it like writers think of a writer's block, only she's talking about quilter's block, and she's got a very systematized way to approach it and think about it and get yourself out of the doldrums. Let's see what else. I think one of her business breakouts is growing and storing and managing a video library, which when you start, you know, videoing a lot of things, that can become an issue. Like, how do you find them? How do you find them when you want them again? That sort of thing. How do you name them? All that sort of stuff. So that's Sam. What else can I tell about the cruise? We are doing something that I think is new to quilting cruises, which is we're recording all the lessons. Because they're at a long arm, you know, we can't take enough long arms on the boat for everybody to get a chance, a significant chance, to practice the lessons. So we're going to have them overhead on the big screen, and we're going to record them all also. So everybody gets to take home the recordings of those lessons. Everybody on the cruise, Mr. Producer's telling me. Yes, I thought that went without saying, but maybe not. All the cruisers get to take home those lessons and rewatch them. So as far as I know, like I said, that's a new thing. I've not heard that done on other cruises. We're going to give it a try. We feel like there's real value in that. And of course, all three of us are course producers, so we see the value in having something that you can watch and rewatch. You know, it's really great to have that personal touch of being in a lesson with someone, and that's the beauty of coming on the cruise in person. But also, you know, I've been to classes too, attended classes at quilt shows, and it's like drinking from a fire hose. You know, for 3 hours you learn a ton of material, and then you get home and you're like, now where do I start again? And so this way the cruisers can take the lessons home and just walk through them step by step, and hopefully really get some great benefit from them that way. So there's a few rooms left for that. We would love to be able to say that we're sold out here within the next 7 days or so. That's our goal. Mr. Producer, I know, has been putting links up. That kind of goes without saying. If you want any more information on that, follow the link to the website. There's a lot of FAQs there. And we hope to be doing we plan to be doing a live Q&A session, Dave and I, here within the next week or two. Also answering any questions you may have about the cruise. Any of the logistics, any of the excursions, availability, things like that. We've purposely planned it so that the lessons are on the at-sea days, of which there are 3, leaving you absolutely free to be a vacationer on the at port days, which are the other 4 days, so that you get a really solid vacation into. If you are enjoying today's quilting session, take a second, if you would, to give YouTube a big old thumbs up, so they'll pass it on to other quilters. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and maybe even click the bell for notifications of when I'm going live next. I endeavor to do these live and unscripted shows twice a month. It doesn't always happen with my traveling schedule, so wise to have the notifications on, and or to be receiving my newsletter, where I try and let you know when they're upcoming a day or two in advance, and even a photo of the quilt in question and what the topics might be. So if you have not yet signed up for my newsletter and would like to, you can do that easily at my website, stitchedbysusan.com. You'll get a little pop-up there that invites you to sign up for a freebie, and that'll put you on my newsletter. And here we are traveling. Traveling. And that's just a result of me looking at the area that's yet to be covered and thinking, I need to get some of that stuff that's far away from me quilted in before I quilt too much at the front edge close to me. And really, truly, echoing or traveling is definitely a quilter's best friend, and we just ran out of bobbin thread. And that's how I do it. I just run till the bobbin thread runs out. Then I get my trusty seam ripper. Are we in camera? Mr. Producer's going to change to a closer camera. Like so. The thing about letting your bobbin thread run out, as I do, is that the last couple of inches, there's not really any tension on that bobbin thread, so you have to undo at least 2 inches, I would say. From there, I tend to back up to a place where I think the join will be secure, often a seam allowance, or the join will be unobtrusive, often a point of the design. So where might that be? Well, I'm looking back, and right here I was crossing a seam allowance. We can see that? We can see that. I was crossing a seam allowance, and there's a crossover of my thread. It's not exactly a point, but a crossover is pretty close. So that's where I'm going to head. And then we'll put our fresh bobbin on. I'm sorry you can't really see where I'm going, but I've got to be able to undo. I'll show you when I get to the end of it. So I'm going to go close to that area. You can see I'm a few stitches away, and I'm going to start stitching again back here and over stitch on that little area. That's what's going to secure this all in place, and I don't have to worry about it coming undone. And then I usually drop my blue seam ripper right where that joint is, head off to the side to put my fresh bobbin in. Sometimes I oil between bobbins. Realistically, I probably only oil every second bobbin, and so I'm not going to at this moment because I've only got about a half a bobbin's worth of stitching left. Maybe not even that. So I tuck my bobbin in its case. I pull a few inches out, like 8 or 10, to feel how that tension is. I tuck my bobbin in. I pull again to feel what the tension feels like. I just had such a good object lesson in this last week I was quilting, and I kept feeling it too tight underneath. And I had to adjust and adjust my bobbin casing. That's not where I want to start stitching. And I only knew that just literally by the feel, by pulling on that bobbin thread. And so I do that a lot, just so I know what it feels like. That helps me to know what it feels like, and it helps me not to get crummy tension on the back. So here we are. If you can see my thread, I think you can. Right here is where I undid the stitching to. I'm going through multiple seam allowances, and right here is where I'm starting my new thread. So when I stitch over this area with a few close lock stitches, and it's through those multiple layers of seam allowance, that's going to be nice, secure stitching. That's never coming undone. I lock stitch twice, and now I'll trim those little threads and move on. Maybe I should have oiled. My bobbin's really rattling. I think it'll be fine though. I only oiled one bobbin ago, so I know it's not terribly thirsty. And as I get near to the bottom edge of this quilt, it does start to become a little more challenging to fit in whole repeats of the design. So I really deeply depend on the traveling and echoing then to get me out of tight corners, or to get me to too tight corners where I need to fill in some stitching. Here we are to the last of our little burnt gingerbread men. They're very meta. The print on the gingerbread men is little gingerbread girls. Pretty funny. On the perfectly done gingerbread man, it's little gingerbread people also. Super cute. Fairly relaxed about how many loops or exactly what they look like when I'm nearing the edge of the quilt and trying to squeeze them in. I feel like what's most important is that I keep the spacing consistent, so even if the loops are a bit sort of oddly shaped, I just don't want to leave any unquilted chunks or have any super tightly quilted chunks. That feels to me more eye-catching than whether or not I've got 2 loops or 3 loops or just 1 loop all by itself. You may find a different way that works for you, but that's been a good rule of thumb for me over the years, is focus on keeping the overall closeness of the spacing pretty consistent. And then the eye just sees texture, especially after a quilted item has been washed a time or two. That's all you'll see is the texture overall. You won't see the imperfections in loops or the different sizes of loops or whatever, if that spacing is pretty consistent. This is the corner where, if you recall, I worked in a little bit of fullness along this edge. So I'm just using my other hand to guide a bit of it under the needle, much like we did with basting the edge. If we guide it under the needle that little bit faster, it's almost like easing it in, exactly like if you were piecing and easing in a little bit of fabric fullness. You'll see it more as I come to the bottom corner. And I crossed over a line of stitching, and you know what? It's gonna live there. And there we are, right at the corner. So you can see there is that bit of fullness in there, but we managed to just nudge it into place without any pleats. And again, that will absolutely be invisible in the finished project. But we've managed to achieve nice square corners. There weren't any star points, but if we had any star points, we wouldn't have cut any off, right? So that's all important. Okay, do we have any questions or comments? Our quilt is done. I'm so excited. That was a quick project. Marion, what might cause eyelashes on the underside in the curves of feathers or the filaments when tension is good everywhere else? If you're working at a sit-down machine, it is often unevenness of movement, like uber fast or uber slow, usually more fast around a corner. That could be a thing. On your long arm, if it's happening, I would say check like your bobbin, make sure that backlash spring is firmly in place because it feels like the tension is going wonky in those corners. It can be a number of different things, but that's where I'd start looking, I think. Suzanne, do you ever get nesting or a nest of thread on the back when you lock stitch? I don't, Suzanne, because I did it so quickly and I didn't talk about it today, but I hang on to the top, take one stitch and pull up the bobbin thread and then hang on to them both. And because I'm hanging on to both, it does not create a nest on the back. And I do that if I'm working at my domestic machine too. I get both threads to the top, hang on to them both, and that prevents that nest on the back. Noreen, do you like to do dense quilt or looser? I would say compared to what I see a lot of people asking for, I quilt on the denser side because I like the overall look of texture better than seeing like big filaments. I'd rather just see the even texture of these loops. In practice, that works out to be 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, I would say my quilting usually is. But that's getting more and more common. So it doesn't, people don't think of that as dense so much anymore. You used to see more like 3 and 4 inch spaced quilting, and you don't see a lot of that, or I don't these days. So, Noreen, again, I'm a sit-down machine quilter and would love a stencil of that design. Have you ever thought about making a stencil book for all your freehand designs? I've thought about it, Noreen, but I chose instead to do the online course rather than a book, and I don't know that I would offer it in both ways. I'll think about that, though. Thanks for the idea. Mr. Producer is just reminding me, if in fact you are an advanced member, I do have a doodle sheet that goes with this particular design. So it's like a practice sheet that you can print out and doodle over. Now, I don't know that it won't be the right scale for working at your sewing machine because it's on a smaller scale on a piece of paper, but it would give you the motions and the movements and how I connect the things and all of that stuff. So know that that is there. Okay. That's it for questions. You guys, thanks so much for joining me. A couple quick things before I go. This has been a live and unscripted episode. If you've enjoyed it, please do give YouTube a thumbs up so they know to show it to other quilters, and it just makes me know that you enjoy the type of content I'm bringing you. Sign up for my newsletter if you want to know when new live and unscripted episodes are coming. I try to send out a newsletter in advance with the project that's coming under the needle and some details about it. Our upcoming cruise, we are hoping to sell our last couple of rooms by about the 7th of December in the next week or so. There's two or three left. We're not positive which. We'll have to go look. Anyway, it's coming up in January with Beth Ann Nemish and Sam Albert. It's going to be a great time of fairly intensive machine quilting intermingled with some great holiday days when you're free to go on excursions and just enjoy yourself. So that's coming up in January. Mr. Producer's throwing up a link. I know he is. Savannah, Dave, if you could let her know it was Splenda. Good to know. Good to know. Always on the lookout for some good sugar replacement options. So, okay, any more thoughts or questions? If not, thanks everyone for joining me, and I will catch up with you next time. Have a great holiday season, and I'll see you in December.